Hello and good afternoon from Brussels, and welcome to this webinar on the 2025 Work Programme for the European Research Council. The Work Programme, which was published in July of this year, sets out the details of the current and forthcoming ERC grant competitions. My name is Martin Penny, and I'm the Head of Unit for Communications in the ERC Executive Agency, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues who are very much experts in the Work Programme and faces you may know from previous versions of this webinar. So I'm joined by Angela Liberatori, who is the head of the scientific department, and Jose Labastida, who is the head of the unit supporting the European Research Council. And they will be available to tell you more on the ERC work programme for this year and the grant competitions and answer any questions that you may have. I'm pleased to see that so many people are connected to the webinar this afternoon. Before we start, I'd like to point out that the questions and answers in YouTube is deactivated, but you can ask your questions via Slido. And the Slido code will remain the same throughout the whole duration of the webinar, and it is the code that you see now on your screens, and so you can ask the questions directly during Slido. To start things off, it's always good for us to know who's here today. So we have some questions to you to get to know our audience. To reply, you can use the Slido hashtag. Use the one on the screen, ERC 2025, or the QR code that you see on screen. And the first question is very simple. We'd like to know where you're connecting from. So if you can enter the country that you're connecting from, and we can see who is there. Give you a few minutes to answer the questions. See the responses are coming in the 40s. Just wait a few more for more of you to respond. Over 115. Coming in very fast, over 140, 150. Okay, as we approach the 200, perhaps we can see the results to see where people are connecting from. And ask the technical team if you can put the results on screen.
We don't see them in our screen, don't
we? We don't see them in our screen.
Because we have the same screen as the people who have been voting.
But we have participants from all across Europe and beyond. I see many from many of our member states and from countries beyond.
I see Germany, Portugal, Denmark, Italy, Austria, Spain, Croatia, and many more.
That's great. So from across the whole of Europe. Okay. Whilst hopefully I will see the responses to the next screen, so I won't have to ad-lib as much. And my second question is really to know your job position. So just a simple question so we can see who the audience is. And there, are you a researcher, or you're a PhD student or postdoc? Are you administrative staff helping those applying their fellow applications, technical staff, or are you from others? Okay, I see the results are coming in. A lot of technical support, which is great. Lots of university administrators helping you apply. We're on over 200 responses. Many researchers. The numbers of researchers increasing. Still postdocs, other support, and other technical staff. Okay. So I think this is really good news when you look at the number of administrative staff that are helping. All of you as researchers, you've got a lot of people to help you with your applications. And now the final question is just as simple as the previous ones. We'd like to know whether you've already applied for an ERC grant or you're planning to apply for an ERC grant. And as you see here, questions I've applied and I'm successful. I've applied, but I haven't received a grant as yet. I've never applied. And I haven't applied, but I'm planning to apply. For some of you, you may not be planning to apply at all, so there's a non-applicable as well. This is good news. I see the majority of people are planning to apply. So we see almost half of you who have replied to the moment are planning to apply. So this is very much the webinar for you. And we hope we can answer the questions that you may have to help you make successful applications. Okay, when it comes to the questions in this webinar, I'd like to encourage you to start asking questions already on Slido, or to endorse or like questions asked by others, because we will address later in the question and answer session the top voted questions first. Just so that you know, we'll try to answer all of the questions on Slido, but if by the end of the webinar we haven't had enough time to answer all of the questions, we'll respond to them in writing afterwards, and you'll be able to access those answers on our website. On YouTube, should you wish, you can enable the live captions in English as a visual aid. And also in the description box, you can find a link to the types of grants that the ERC offers, the announcement of the 2025 work programme, and the link to our previous webinars on the lump sums for advanced grants. And of course, there's lots of other information available on our website and through information on our social media channels, including notably LinkedIn and Instagram, as well as through our WhatsApp channel. And of course, through the NCP, National Contact Point Network, in the EU member states and in the countries associated to the Horizon Europe programme and other countries from across the world. And these NCPs are your local sources of advice and guidance. But enough of introduction, let's now discuss the 2025 work programme. And I'll turn first of all to my colleague Jose with a question which I'm sure many people will want to know. All those participating in the workshop, in the webinar, probably the thing they're most interested in is what are their chances of success? What are the budgets that are available in the forthcoming calls? And how many grants are we expecting to fund? And I know that there is additional funding coming through from the associated countries. So maybe you can say something on that too.
Sure. Thank you, Martin, for this question, because this allows us to start sharing with everyone the good news. And the good news is that we have the highest budget ever at ERC. It amounts to 2.7 billion. And it is distributed among our different funding schemes. As probably most of the people know, this is a decision of our scientific council, that is our governing body. And this time they have decided to increase the funding for synergy grants. Synergy grants had an allocation of 500 million. And this is as a response to the demand that we have been experiencing the last years in this funding scheme. The rest of the money is distributed among the classical starting consolidator and advanced grant calls. And they are the approach of our council to allocate funding to these calls is try to estimate, okay, at the time when they decide that, they have some data, but not all the data to have an accurate, let's say, result for the success rate of different calls. But we have mechanisms to estimate. So with these estimates, they try to equalize the success rate. So the chances in each of the funding schemes are the same. In more practical terms, and probably you have seen it in previous years, this ends having like 1/3 for each of the funding schemes, apart from the money that I mentioned already for synergy grants. For the POC funding scheme, we will continue with, as in the previous year, with 30 million. Okay. So the number of grants, okay, what we expect to be awarding to our researchers. For the main funding scheme will be a total of approx 1,000 grants plus 200 grants in the POC funding scheme.
So 1,200 grants, that's a lot of grants and a lot of opportunities for everybody. And I think that's good news for all the highest number of grants we'll be able to award. Angela, I'd like to also turn to you, because I know that the 2025 work programme includes some changes to the reasons for extending the eligibility window for the candidates for starting and consolidator grant. I think it'd be useful if you could provide us with a reminder of what the eligibility conditions are, and then also explain these new changes. And if there are other novelties in the work programme that you think would merit highlighting, if you could please do so as well.
Sure, Martin, and good afternoon to everyone, or good morning if you're in other continents, could also be your good night. Well, yes, we have a number of eligibility extensions to the eligibility windows, because we know that life is not the same for everyone. So we have to find a balance between the diversity of lives and ways of having a fair competition. So the extensions we had for quite a number of years are maternity leaves, paternity leaves, long-term illness, national service, long-term illness, sorry, I said that already, a national service, as well as more recently seeking asylum and major disasters. The changes in 25 are about disability. Disability was included along with long-term sickness in the same ground, if you like. So it was not as distinct and visible for our applicants to see it was there.
Okay.
And also it was important to show that disability is not considered a sickness. Of course, is a condition that creates certain difficulties and needs to be recognized, but it's not a sickness. When it comes to major disasters, basically we were covering major natural disasters. Your laboratory have been swamped by a tsunami or a flood or something, or you cannot access your field work because of an earthquake. But unfortunately, we humans also create a lot of major disasters. So this ground was extended to include not only natural disasters, but also human-made disasters, such as wars, armed conflicts, or industrial accidents. Among other novelties, one which is not really a novelty, but is something which is now more transparent for applicants, as well as surely for our panel members, is that the work program explicitly says that panel members cannot select one part of the proposal and have that put forward. The idea is that this evaluation and selection is on the proposal as it is. And this is a highly competitive process, so either the proposal as it is all excellent, or otherwise it competes with other proposals that are excellent when this one is only, I don't know, half excellence or two-thirds excellence. And this is why that guidance is transparent for all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both of you. I think that probably may have answered some of the questions that some of you had, but it's now time to turn to you. Again, I'd encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to ask your questions in Slido using the hashtag which is on screen. You'll see already there's a good number of questions coming in. And maybe I'll start already with the first question, turning to Jose, which is very much advanced planning. We know that it takes time to write competitive applications. And so question, will you publish the tentative timeline of the 2026 calls in spring 2025? As they say, it was very useful to know in advance when the deadlines are. So Jose.
Yes, I mean, this has been the practice in the last years, okay, to give an advance in the spring. I cannot say how early in the spring, because, I mean, there is a decision process to approve and adopt the work program. But certainly we will do our best to publish it as early as possible, okay, as we have been doing in the past years. So the answer is yes.
Okay, that's always good to hear, and being the top question, I see there's a lot of interest in that. The next question, Angela, maybe I can turn to you because it's following up from what you said on eligibility, looking particularly at starting grant and COG, and a question, if you've spent time out of academia, are those years deducted after the PhD in terms of the eligibility?
Well, actually not. The idea is that they are considered in the evaluation, and this is also, it was already explicit that unusual career break, now called diverse career breaks and paths, are considered. So the evaluation panel will be able to see whether somebody, for example, I don't know, was working for an humanitarian organization or was working on a business, not in the research department of the business, which is research anyhow, and will be able to appreciate whether, for example, in terms of patterns of publication or other aspects of research, this had a consequence. But in terms of counting years, the years are the years from the PhD defense date plus all the extensions on the ground that we just mentioned previously.
Okay, Angela, thank you, very clear. And then a question again, maybe Jose, I turn to you. For the starting grant, it states the minimum time commitment of the PI is 50%. And the question is really, what's the ideal percentage? Is 60% enough, or would having a lower percentage just above the minimum negatively affect the evaluation of the application?
Well, this 50% is the minimum, okay, but the time commitment of the applicant doesn't affect the evaluation in the sense that the assessment that the panel does is it with the time commitment that is in the application is feasible to carry out the project. So we cannot really say, okay, 70 or 80 is better than 60. It depends very much on the project. And one of the tasks of the panel is to assess if what you have proposed is consistent to ensure the feasibility of the project, that all the tasks that you will be doing are implemented properly.
So, in other words, it's part of the responsibility of the researcher when they're making the application to set out why the justification for the time commitment they're proposing, so that the panel can assess that accordingly. Okay, thank you. Then the next question is looking at the lump sums. And the question is, will the lump sum be extended to starting grant and consolidated grant? As you know, this is something which we've introduced for advanced grants, and we had a webinar on that just before the summer as well. But I think people wanting to know for the future, will it be extended to starting grant and consolidated grant? And if so, what's the timeline?
Well, this is actually more for the Scientific Council to decide. For the time being, the Scientific Council considers this a pilot. So we will first need to take stock from advanced grant. 25 will be the second year, so the call of advanced 24 just started. So this means that there will be at least a lapse of time to be able to take stock and see how it works, and then the council will decide whether to extend it also to other calls.
Thank you, very clear. Jose, I'll turn to you for the next question, although I see it's actually just moved down to the second topic question, but since I've started, I will finish. In terms of, is it planned to increase the funding for an individual grant, as the amounts are given to grants have remained the same since almost the beginning of the ERC? Very topical question this week, particularly after the Draghi report has been published.
Right. Well, the Scientific Council, of course, has assessed this question several times, okay? And the conclusion has been basically to wait to revise the size of the grants. Why? Because with the budget that we currently have, and we will have until the end of this framework program, to increase the size of the grants will have an impact in the number of grants that we will be able to give. So the success rate will decrease. So here there is always a trade-off, okay, more people granted or bigger sizes. And the council has decided to wait. Okay, the good news is that we have the hope that for the next framework program, we will have a significant increase that will allow to do this long-awaited revision of the size of grants. So we will have grants that with power purchase similar to the ones that to the one they have 10 years ago. Okay, so they will be grants more in the spirit of the ERC to fund projects. Okay, that are well equipped with resources, with people, based on the amount that the PIs receive. So, very briefly, difficult that this will happen in this framework program, though this is constantly analyzed by our Scientific Council, but we have all our hopes that in the next framework program, especially after what we have seen this week, okay, in the report by Draghi, okay, it's recommended that not ERC, but the whole framework program will have a significant increase, and of course this will affect us, we expect, okay, and we will be able to probably not only to increase the size, but also to be able to fund more grants. Okay.
Okay, very clear, and we will all keep our fingers crossed for that, as you say, and Angela says. Yeah. Angela, this is the next question is a really interesting one, because it's a question from a researcher who's obviously looking to start out, and asking whether it's worth their time or worth the effort to apply if you're not currently a PI, so you don't actually have your research group. Are you able to apply then?
Yes, please do so. The starting grant is really to get started in your path towards independence. The idea is that you should demonstrate with, it's really, quite a low requirement with one publication without your PhD supervisor to demonstrate that this is your idea and you know how to go about it. But definitely, you don't need to have already your research group, you don't need to have your research lab, you don't need, I don't know, if you're an archaeologist, to have already your own excavation or similar. You really can use the ERC grants to get started. So the answer is warmly yes.
And I think that's really interesting. And you see it in some of the examples that we funded. We announced the results of the starting grant last week. You can see lots of examples of PIs who are just in that position. They didn't have their research group yet. And also you'll see in a video that we produced from that, their tips and techniques on how you write good applications as well. Angela, if I can turn to you for the next question as well, because it's really relating to the evaluation. And wanting to know if the CV of the PI is considered in the first stage of the evaluation.
Yes. As you know, excellence is addressed in the evaluation as the sole criterion, both for the project, the proposal, the idea, and the principal investigator. So they are both addressed in both steps, well, particularly step one, that was the question. What has been introduced, I would say, more explicitly in Work Programme 24, and will continue in 25, is that the weight of the proposal, if you like, of the idea is higher, meaning the panel first looks into the proposal and then looks at the track record of the principal investigator. Okay,
very, very clear. Jose, I'll turn to you, but I think Angela will also want to ask this question as well. It's relating to the additional funding which can be given to grants. So additional funding of €1 million, which can be used for major equipment, for field work, for costs of relocating back to the EU and so on. And the question is it advantageous to request this? Does it affect the success in getting the ERC grant?
Well, it's not advantageous. I mean, you can request this, okay? And it's for the panel to assess if what you are asking related to this additional fund is needed for the project or not, okay? It will be assessed as any other element of the project. But the fact that you put it or not is not advantageous or disadvantageous, okay? Yeah.
Okay, Angela, anything you want to add?
I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, then a question, it's really to both of you because it relates to the work programme and also relates to the way in which evaluation is put in place. And it relates to the term of high risk, high gain, which is a phrase which was often used in the work programme in the past, which we don't use as prominently anymore. Maybe, Angela, if you can explain why we've moved away from using that phrase. But the specific question, Jose, if we come to you on the specific question afterwards, is why is it still listed under proof of concept?
Okay, so in the Work Programme 24, the Scientific Council, after a long analysis, also in line with all the work on research assessment that has been going on also, in all Europe and beyond, decided to look again at our evaluation criteria. And when looking at the high risk again, also as a feedback from panels, we often had people asking, how do we actually deal with this? For example, real examples, you are an economist, you think that having high gain and low risk is actually optimal, and I heard the same in other panels, not only by the economists, also in physics or life sciences. At the same time, clearly the message wanted to be, we want to have ambitious projects and to take the risk to propose something new. That by being new, obviously you don't know how it's going to end up, whether it will be the breakthrough or whether it will not. So the council wanted to give a clear message that we want applications to break new ground, to be ambitious. So from that point, implicitly, you are taking a risk to do so, and that in terms of that is not interpreted as taking high risk, meaning being reckless and proposing something where you actually don't know how to go about it. Because it's also true feedback from panels and also from the science report on scientific analysis of completed project that will come out soon, that sometimes people just propose things and they do not show a backup plan or how to tackle risk and so on. So that's a little bit what was the reason to take away this from the main grants, but the spirit is there. We want people to be able to take risk and at the same time to be able to deal with those. And of course the high gain is new discoveries, new knowledge, and as we know, through that we can have a lot of other good things for our society, as again the report mentioned and others.
True.
And Jose, on POC?
On POC, well, the revision that was mentioned before of the evaluation process was targeting our what we call main funding schemes, starting consolidated funds, synergy. The evaluation of POC has not been revised yet. Okay. But I mean, many of the arguments that Angela mentioned that the Scientific Council used for this revision and to conclude that this term will not be among the elements for the evaluation, most likely will apply once to POC once the revision of the evaluation of POC is done. That maybe is coming in the next work program or in 2017. This is not a schedule, but it is something that is needed because it's a long time since the evaluation process in POC has not been revised in depth as it's happened with the other funding schemes.
Okay, now very, very clear. The next question is really looking in terms of the links with the rest of the framework programme, particularly the excellence pillar, and ask, are there any specific programmes or conditions for Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellows to apply for ERC funding? Maybe I turn to Angela first, since it was Jose answer the last question.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we love our colleagues in Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions and the people having those grants, but there is no specific link. Differently, maybe from in the mind of the person who asked, is the fact that if you have a POC from ERC, you can apply the transition instrument of the European Innovation Council. We do not have such a sort of direct link. So what we have is that clearly there are people who got a grant, Marie Curie, and got an ERC grant, or they had a Marie Curie, applied and didn't get the ERC grant. So just to add to the question, having a Marie Curie before is neither a precondition nor either a preference or anything else. Of course, it's a nice grant to have and to get started, especially for the younger cohort, and especially for the cohort we don't cover, which is 0 to 2 years after PhD.
Which is really a target area for Marie Curie. And as you say, we see many Marie Curie fellows that have gone on to win ERC grants, but it's not a prerequisite in any way, and not something which is, there's no specific scheme in answer to the question. Jose, just in terms of sharing the questions out equally, I come to you for the next question, which is a very standard question we get asked a lot. And I think it's one which is really important in understanding when you apply to our grants. How important is it to have preliminary results to be able to be funded with an ERC grant?
Well, that depends very much on the research area. Okay. There are areas where this is an element that our panels they consider very, very relevant to assess the feasibility of the proposal. There are others that is less. Okay. There is not a general rule for this. It depends very much on the type of research proposed. Obviously, I mean, to have some preliminary results in general helps to make your case. Okay? But we see that this is more frequent in, for instance, in the areas that are more experimental, less in the areas that are more theoretical. Okay, and I mean, the recommendation is always helps. Okay, but this is not something absolutely essential to be able to get a grant. Okay.
Thanks. Angela, anything additional you want to add from your side?
I think that Jose answered. Maybe an addition is having preliminary results also means, however, the research you propose to ERC should not be only incremental. We love incremental research, it's absolutely necessary. President Maria Leptin says that very often in price of incremental research. We need to build on the shoulder and so on and so forth, the Baconian motto. But the idea, going back to the risk-ambitious breakthrough, is you can rely on preliminary results, but then when you propose something, should go much beyond.
Okay. Then a very timely question, and one which I think is useful in terms of understanding the eligibility criteria. So when you're looking at the eligibility criteria for starting grant and COG, does COVID count as the major disaster? An example of a major disaster you're talking about, Angela?
This is a very smart question because I think we all know it has been a very major disaster. However, the way this has been addressed already back in 2002 or 2003, I don't even remember, was to have this mention with the possibility of a tick box and description as something that the panel takes into account.
Okay.
It's now called among the life events, and it's specifically mentioned COVID. And the notion is to explain whether there were impacts of COVID in basically on the scientific productivity of the person. The reason why it's not in the category of major disasters is that there are very different ways of impacts of COVID. The impacts of COVID could be that you simply could not go and do the field experiment or access the laboratory in the university, but for many areas you could write a lot of papers and be connected online with your community. In other cases, it's more about, for example, caretaking of children or elderly or each other, sickness and so on. So after long discussions on whether to make this an eligibility extension or otherwise, the Council decided to adopt that approach.
Okay, very pragmatic, I understand it. Jose, maybe I come to you to the next question, which is very much a current question. Looking at the results of Advanced Grant, which closed on the 28th of August, what's your take on the 40% increase in the number of applications which were received? The question is, will the success rates drop tremendously as a result of that?
Well, not tremendously. It will drop some a bit, yes. But certainly it will be around 11%. Okay, yes. And yes, we were quite impressed with this number of applications. It's the highest ever for our advanced grant funding scheme. When you look a bit more to the details, okay, we have seen a huge increase of the applications with host institutions in United Kingdom. Okay, this was expected because it's the first time that these cohort researchers can apply and be funded by us. Remember, before they were evaluated by us, but they were funded by United Kingdom. And so we were expecting more, but well, the increase has been like 60%, very large. Okay, if the applications coming from United Kingdom, and on top of this, this time the Swiss, well, the researchers that are based in Switzerland with host institutions in Switzerland, they can apply also to be evaluated. Okay, whether or not they are granted will depend on the ongoing negotiations between the European Union and Switzerland. We will see what happens, but for now we will evaluate our proposals as with the others, and also we have received a substantial number of applications with host institutions in Switzerland. So this is part of the increase. From the other countries, we have seen also some increase here and there, but the main reason for this significant growth in the number of applications in advanced grant is precisely this, UK-based proposals and Swiss-based proposals. Okay,
now that's very clear. Angela, if I can turn to you for the next question, which is a real practical question in terms of advice in terms of writing the application and structuring the B2. When you look at the page limit, they ask, is it okay for just 1 page for section A, state of the art and objectives, and 13 pages for section B on methodology? I guess it depends on the application, but perhaps you can give some advice on that.
Okay, so, well, the idea there is that, the state of the art is what has been there already, so you build on it. But the idea of the Scientific Council is to give you more space to explain what is that you want to do and how you want to do it. And this is why there is this breakdown. Now, whether this is enough or whether there should be 2 pages and 12, and, okay, of course there can be always...
Okay, no, I think that's clear. And Angela, I turn to you for the next question as well, because it's actually something we started the webinar with, but not everyone may have joined us at the beginning of the webinar. So I think it would be useful to maybe if you can summarise your question before, which are, what are the main differences between this work programme for 2025 and the previous one? So maybe if you can give a brief overview.
Very quickly, the main difference between Work Programme 25 and 24 is one, eligibility with extension of eligibility windows on the ground of disability, and the extension of the ground on major disasters to include not only the natural but also the human-made. A second point, which is not a major but still useful to know, change is to be explicit on the fact that the panels should not just rework the proposal and select only part of it, that it should be all of it. Then we have other things like a change in a descriptor in one of the PE panel, PE6, the computer science one, and there is the possibility in synergy grants, since we saw large interest, to have 7 panels instead of 5 if necessary. But this is more about the internal evaluation process rather than something that has any bearing for the applicants.
Thank you.
Maybe if I can add,
Go ahead.
Another novelty in this work program is that Horizon Europe allows the member states to use money from the European Research Development Fund, those countries that they receive these funds. It allows to use part of those funds in some of the Horizon Europe programs, meaning that they could transfer some of the money that they have in their national funds of this origin to a specific program like ERC, Marie Curie, Pillar 2, whatever. They have the limitation that this cannot be more than 5% of the funding that they have. And then this is for first time portrayed in our work program because we had to do an addition to the portability rules of our grants, because the use of these funds comes with a constraint. The constraint is that they have to be used in the country. So that imposes limited portability. API that has a grant that is using these funds, could move within the country but not go to the grant to another country. And what is the mechanism? The mechanism is that using these funds, if they are transferred, let's say for ERC, in the case of the ERC, if the API applied and got an A in step 2, but is below the level that we are able to fund, could be funded using these funds for, let's say, A's, that are below the cutoff. These funds can be used in these particular cases. So it's an opportunity, and some countries, they are considering this option to transfer some of the funds to ERC to be able to fund these successful proposals that due to our limitations in our budget, we are not able to fund.
And that's really good news, Jose, because of course we often have large numbers of proposals, unfortunately, which are past all the quality thresholds, but we don't have the budget to fund. So excellent news for all of you who are applying. Next 2 questions I'm going to take together, and it relates to one we've already answered, which is the relative balance between the Section A and the Section B of the Part B2 document, and how the pages should be split. But also, the following question is asking, is it okay to write them as one section, or do the reviewers have to mark each of the 2 sections separately on state-of-the-art and methodology? So maybe, Angela, we can take the 2 questions together.
Thank you. Actually, maybe I will invite the people asking these very pragmatic and practical questions to look at one of our ERC classes with the tips and how
that's
to
a good
apply,
idea.
because they can go much more in detail than now. But to be very clear, we do not prescribe so much in detail how to go about it. And our panels are looking at the whole B2 proposal, the scientific proposal, and they evaluate all of it. So they are not having a sub-mark for each of the areas.
Okay.
They are supposed to address the whole proposal and to say whether this proposal is innovative, break new ground, and so on and so forth. But they are not going to have, a number of points and then they aggregate an average or whatever. So take your idea and be able to define the objectives, how you're going to implement it methodologically, why you think is new, how you're going to go about it. And again, depending on the fields, for example, if you are in an experimental field or in a theoretical one, you will need to, organize your space and argumentation in different ways.
So clear, no page limits, no separate marking. It's really for the researcher
The
themselves.
page limits is for the total.
No, for the total. No, within the two sections, there's no page limits. But it's really for the researcher themselves when you're writing your proposal to make sure that it tells your story in the best way possible. Then the question, maybe I come to you, Jose, on this one. When we're looking at the evaluators that evaluate our proposals, how do they see the use of artificial intelligence in writing proposals, instead of elaborating proposals, writing proposals? How will that affect the evaluation process?
Well, this aspect of the use of artificial intelligence in writing proposals or for our evaluators using tools to write the review has been addressed by our scientific council. This is quite novel, and the position of our council for the time being is that you don't have to declare if you do it or you are not doing it, okay? But you are fully responsible of what you are writing, whether you are API proposing a research proposal or an evaluator. You are fully responsible. You could use tools based on artificial intelligence. You could use colleagues to help you to have a better writing or even to improve your idea. We don't care, okay? But you are responsible of what you write. And if this has some consequences, for instance, there are elements linked to priorities or other things, you are responsible. So you have to be conscious that what you write, whether what is the origin of what you write, is really your proposal, is your idea, okay? The way you are putting there, because if you go to step 2, you will have to defend it in front of the panel, okay? And it's your idea. What are we doing? We are monitoring this, of course, okay? This is the initial position of the council, and we are monitoring this, trying to see if we identify cases, if we get information from some PIs that tell us that they have used it, what has been the outcome of that, or reviewers, etc., etc. So, summarizing, okay, for the time being, responsibility is you, the writer, okay?
Very clear.
Second, we are monitoring to see how this evolves, and the council may take other decisions in the future. But this is the current.
Very clear. And that's
Can I give an example?
Sure, I was going to turn to you because you hear from the evaluators all the time.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a real life example, but for example, we know that some generative AI system can lead to hallucinations.
Yes.
Now, if a panel finds that in the proposal it seems that there is something really like an hallucination, are not going to say, oh, poor applicant, he didn't realize that by using generative AI, he or she, they got in some kind of hallucination. We'll say, well, it seems that there was an AI work here, and it was not really smartly used. So, as Jose said, for the Scientific Council, the point really is we want to advance knowledge. We are giving grants to humans, not to technologies. But of course, humans are harvesting the power of technology, hopefully in a wise, smart way. So if you use a tool, you better know how to use it and be fully responsible for it, including, as Jose said, if there is plagiarism, and you don't detect that the generative AI is doing it, and we detect it, it's an integrity breach. You are out.
Okay, Just as a break before I move on to the next question, there are still 82 questions which are to be asked. As I said at the outset of the webinar, we'll try our best to answer all of them during the time of the webinar, but we'll ensure that you get written responses afterwards as well, which will be available on our website.
That's some work to do.
There's some work to do afterwards, but don't let that stop you from submitting
Absolutely.
submitting questions. We're more than happy to answer all of them for you. So the next question really comes back to our term of frontier research. And the question is there any chance to win a starting grant with a project that's between fundamental research and applied research?
Yes.
Oh, of course. Yes, of course.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we use the term frontier research precisely to avoid these two terms, fundamental, sometimes called also basic, and applied, okay? But yes, we fund a lot of applied research, okay? You can just look at the projects that are in our website and see that we fund a lot of applied research.
And I think that's a good tip as well, Jose, to look for examples of existing projects, which you can access the abstracts of all those from our website, linking to the Cordis website. And I think it's a good idea for all of you to do so. And you can look at the types of projects and the scale of ambition, and also this balance of, as you say, between fundamental and applied. We don't use the terms, we use frontier research. And so I can turn to you to the next question, which is really a fundamental one for us. How important is the host institution? Can you move your grant to another institution and country even before it starts?
So the answer is that the host institution, of course, it's very important for you because you need to have the space, the support, the place for the team or for the lab and so on and so forth. So it is very important. It's not an evaluation criterion. It used to be at the beginning of ERC, but as a matter of bias control, meaning it should not be the reputation of the host institution that carries weight, but really the idea and the principal investigator track record and link between the two that carries the weight. And also because, and this is the answer to the second part of the question, pragmatically, you might start an application with one host institution, and then even before signing the grant, so the answer is yes, even before signing the grant, another host institution headhunt you, provides better offer, and you decide, well, actually, that's the place where I'm going to go. So also from that point of view, having this as part of the initial evaluation would not make much sense because it can change, and it can change even before signing the grant.
Okay.
Clear. The next question relates to the use of artificial intelligence tools in the evaluation procedure. We've covered that already in a previous question, so maybe I'll move on to the next one, which is a very simple question. Is there a list of the grant opportunities available for 2025? Let's see. This is our work programme, essentially.
Grant opportunities are our work programme.
Yes, and so the work programme which we adopted in July sets out all of those opportunities, so you can access those directly. Then, Angela, turning to you in terms of an eligibility question, particularly for starting a consolidated grant and relating to paternity leave. And what consideration is available on paternity leave is impossible to justify due to the working conditions at the time when the children were born?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Now, the point is that you need to, show that there was an impact by having paternity leave and by having paternity and taking some kind of leave. In terms of, let's say, documentation, actually, it's very simple. It can be your dean saying, well, Mr. Y had to take paternity leave for a while, or it can be, we have cases in federal countries where the, for example, the lender authority or the municipality can issue something. If you're in an industry, it can be, your employer who says, for a part of the time you were out. So the point is, and again, the diversity of conditions is big, and we want to be sure that fathers also have the opportunity to take time for care. We are also evidence-based, so we have recommendation at the EU level encouraging fathers to actually take the leave, because sometimes there are leaves opportunities and they are not taken. So we want to be part of this effort to make sure this happens. And really, don't worry if you have doubts. Come back to us. because sometimes we know that some people thought that, by having, by not having a certain kind of very formal certificate, it would not be possible at all. But, then it came out that there were possibilities of indicating that a leave was actually taken.
Okay, very clear. The next two questions I see on the list are questions we've already answered or a variant of them in terms of increasing the overall funding per project, and also looking at why high risk, high gain is not a phrase which is used anymore. So I suggest we, in the interest of time, we skip over those questions since we've answered them already. But then, Angela, again, I turn to you because it's relating very much to the evaluation process. And it's looking particularly at when it comes to step 2 with B2. Will we expect the reviewers for B2 have read B1 and the reference figures from B1 as well?
Yes. So basically, the idea is that you have the extended synopsis and you have the full proposal. The extended synopsis gives the main frame, so this is what is looked at step 1. So the panel members at step 2 definitely saw step 1, and at that point they will also see step 2, B2, sorry. So they see the whole proposal. The remote reviewers, that is the specialist in the proposal, because our panel members act as generalists. Generalist doesn't mean, the person on the street. Sure. Means, very cultivated people and expert, but in the broad field of the panel. But then for each proposal, as you know, we have specialized remote referees, so they get the bulk of the proposal, they look at it, and the idea is that by looking at the full proposal, of course, you have all the elements that you need to see, whether that's okay or not.
Okay. Next question, I think we should all give our tips on this. It's for someone who's never applied for grants before. How would you recommend we get the information required? From my side, I would encourage you to look at the participant portal, which gives you all of the documents, all of the background documents, access to the forms. I'd also encourage you to liaise with the national contact points in the country where you're looking to host your ERC grant. But what other top tips would you give to get all the information available?
Ask your colleagues and friends, whether you are in a university or in a research lab or even in a private sector, anyhow, somewhere where you do research, ask whether they had already experience and how they found that experience, in addition, of course, to what you said about...
Jose, anything else?
Well, I think it's essential to contact the NCP, to get information. In many countries, the NCPs, they organize also info sessions that go really in depth about how to write proposals. And even there are some countries that they have they create panels to do a pre-assessment of the proposal, to give recommendations, sometimes with researches that they have already been granted by ERC. Yes, a parenthesis here. In ERC, we have this mentoring program, that we are encouraging many countries and CPs to take into considerations. The mentoring program basically is that we share with the institutions involved in the mentoring information on grantees and former panel members that are willing to mentor. We ask these questions to our grantees and panel members, and these are available for these institutions that are enrolled in the program to get in contact with these people and to organize mentoring sessions, with the potential applicants, that with these people, that they could give good advice since they have had the experience of the grantee, or they have been in the past also evaluators for ERC. So keep it in mind, especially for the let's say institutions representatives that they are listening to us.
And actually there is an increasing interest. And if I may, we also welcome our Ukrainian colleagues who will for the first time take part in the mentoring initiative after the ERC for Refugees for Ukraine initiative, the idea being to do mentoring for people in the country, not only people who would come to other European countries to spend part of their time there.
Okay, I mean, I think those were all really helpful tips. I hope they help the person that asked the question. I'd maybe add just two. Angela, you mentioned the importance of support within the institution, and I recall at the start of this webinar when we asked who was online, there was a lot of university support staff,
Yes.
and those are going to be your first sources of guidance in putting together your application. And I'd also like to mention, you mentioned before, the ERC classes, which were some videos developed by the agency, which take you through the application process and the evaluation process, so that you can get an idea of actually how it happens from the eyes and viewpoints of the people who are running it. Jose, can I turn to you for the next question? It's more in terms of looking at the grant management process. So if you win an ERC grant, they gave the example of a consolidator grant, can the PI hire a specific research assistant at the host institution without a competitive process?
Well, here the message is the rules of the institution to hire staff for the project should be followed. Okay?
Clear.
If the rules of institution allow that, okay, it's fine for us. Okay, if they don't, okay, there will be an issue, because we we check that the rules are followed in the implementation of the grant of the host institutions.
Okay, very clear and very simple. So I think that's a great answer. I'm conscious of time. We're coming 5 minutes before our scheduled end of the webinar. We still have over 80 questions left. I suggest, if it's okay for both of you, we take another 10 minutes to answer questions, so we'll finish the webinar at 4:10 Brussels time, if that's okay for both of you.
Of course.
Then I'll move on to the next question, Angela. That's great. And it's a question, you've touched on it before, but I think it's useful to go through it in detail. Is it possible for a starting grant to get a starting grant if the candidate doesn't have any publications with their doctoral supervisor, without the doctoral supervisor, I beg your pardon?
That's hard. Meaning, we really say there should be at least one publication without your supervisor.
Yeah.
But we also know that we can have other metrics in terms of
Indeed.
research outputs.
Yeah.
So maybe you didn't have a publication, but you started an excavation, or you had an exhibition for something necessary, or so. The answer is yes and no, meaning in principle you have to have at least one thing that really is done without your supervisor to show that you started your path to independence. We do mention publication, but maybe it can be done with another output. But if there is nothing is going to be
But I think
very
in the
hard.
guide for applicants, it gives you ideas of what these other
Yes.
forms of metrics could be. So if it's not a publication, there is a list of potential ideas of what it could be, which will help people and help this candidate, if that's the case, in their specific example. So the next question, I have to interpret in the way I read it. It says, how many grants are going to be funded for the ERC starting grants in 2025? And will the amount be bigger for 2024 or less? I think it's the total amount of funding available for all the grants, not the grant size.
Yeah.
So will there be a higher number of ERC starting grants in 2025 than there were in 2024?
Okay. It will be similar, okay, perhaps slightly higher, okay. That's why I'm saying that, because probably you are looking at the budget in 2024 and the budget in 2025 for a starting grants, and you see that is important difference, okay. The reason why I'm saying that will be similar, even with this difference in budget, is that in 24 we added to the starting grant funding scheme additional funding from associated states, okay, that came later. Okay?
Right, okay.
So the budget allocated to starting grant 24 is not the one in the work program, is more or less like around 20% more. Okay, so basically it's the same figure. So we expect a similar number of grants, but perhaps a bit, because the whole thing keeps growing over the years. Some few more in 25.
Okay, very clear, and good to have the background to explain that, because I'm
yeah.
sure at first sight that could be difficult to understand.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Angela, another question on eligibility, and I turn to you, you're our eligibility expert here. So in terms of the eligibility for starting grant and consolidated grant, the concern in this question is years after PhD is not very inclusive, even though you're allowing for career breaks. It doesn't account for other inequalities. Is this concept going to change?
So this is, of course, a very important question, and the reason why we have extensions of eligibility is indeed to account for diversity, including inequalities. And as I mentioned, the Scientific Council and we as agency supporting the Council is continuously monitoring, and just this year we added, or at least we disentangled, for example, disability, and added the human-made disasters. Asylum seeking was added, some years ago. We all know about the Syria and other inflows of refugees, including academic ones, and the world is not becoming a more peaceful place, unfortunately. So we continuously try to adapt our eligibility extension in a way that takes into account the really diverse situation. Now, years from PhD takes into account the fact that in order to get a competitive grant to foster frontier research, you need to start from somewhere. So for the time being, the Council decided to start from 2 years after PhD, and then to give windows that make the competition, including the eligibility extensions, as fair as possible.
Clear.
So we need to always balance the diversity of situation to make sure that the competition is fair. So, for example, sometimes we are asked, why do we have to document the ground for extension? But the point is, we are all human beings. We have our perception, our diversity. I can decide that the impact of COVID on my time for care at home is bigger than yours, and so we need to be able to address this in a way which is documented.
Okay, thank you. Jose, you want to see you want to come in on that?
No, just let me add another element, okay? In the reform or revision of the evaluation process that was reflected in Work Programme 2024 that Angela mentioned, okay, I mean, this elements that we have already addressed, like the high risk, high gain, that is giving more weight to the idea than to the PI CV, okay? They introduce also very clearly that the evaluators, they have to take into account the context of their career, okay? So what it means this? It means that you as, when you write your proposal, you can explain in the context where your career developed.
Okay.
And there were some special situations, maybe related to some inequalities. I don't know which concrete inequalities the person asking is mentioning, but there is a place to talk about it.
Okay.
And the panels, they have to take into account the context now. Of course, excellence is the only criteria, but excellence in the context where you have been growing as a researcher. Okay, this is also a very important modification done in 24.
No, I think that's very clear, and hopefully addresses the question. I'd also advise when people have questions on the eligibility conditions and how they apply to themselves. That's where it's good to contact the NCPs and get their specific advice in that respect. Question on evaluation. Andrew, I come to you all the time, so I'll turn to Jose first this time, because it's a question about scientific excellence is the only evaluation criterion.
True.
However, can you confirm that implementation and impact are not relevant for the evaluation of proposals?
Well, I mean...
It's a difficult question.
Yes. Okay. Excellence is the only criteria, but as it is explained in our work program, this concept is developed, okay, in a series of questions that are asked to the reviewers and that they have to reply. Okay. So we have excellence only criteria and the questions that they had to be addressed. And this selection of question is basically the interpretation of what excellence is in the mind of our scientific council to take into consideration by the evaluators. Okay. And of course, there are questions that are related to feasibility, okay, very concrete questions. So my recommendation is read very carefully those questions when you write your proposal, and make sure that you provide the elements for the reviewers to answer those questions, okay? Make sure that, you impress the reviewer when they answer the questions.
Sure.
I mean, so in that your idea is excellent, and that on all other aspects of the idea to have a very positive reaction when they answer the question. This is important. For me, it's a very important guide. Look at the questions that your reviewers are going to be answering when you write your proposal, and make sure that you provide the right information, that they are properly answered. Okay.
And I think that's an essential guide to writing any kind of a successful application. Angela, do you have
Maybe on
anything to add?
impacts,
Okay.
we might wish to specify, and I don't know whether the person who asked has experience in so-called Pillar 2 of the framework program, where the
It's a
criteria,
criteria,
there is
yeah.
also a criterion which is about policy, economic, environmental, and other impacts. So in ERC, surely scientific impacts is something that it's part of what a proposal is about. You want to advance knowledge, discover new things, develop new methods, whatever it is. So from the point of view of the evaluation, somehow the explicit or expected scientific impacts is surely something that is part of the analysis, even if we do not have something that says that explicitly. But definitely we do not ask our applicants to tell us ex ante whether they think their research will lead to certain impacts on the economy, on society, on the environment.
Sure.
What we know through our work and analysis and ex post analysis, again advertising for the scientific analysis of completed projects, but also the work which has been done on innovation and the work which we do on feedback to policy, is that by having high quality science, we also have quite important either policy relevant results or socially relevant results or outcome also in terms of innovation and so on. So I hope that we addressed both, so both feasibility and impacts.
Thank you. We're running towards the end of the time, but I think it's still possible for us to take another couple of questions. A really specific question on one which is always timely when you have the transition between the work programmes from one year to the next. Is it possible to submit for the ERC Synergy Call 2025 if I've submitted a grant for the ERC Advanced Grant Call for 2024?
Yes.
It depends on the results.
For synergy, not.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes.
Okay.
Ozzy, do you want to elaborate? Because
No, yes. And I mean, for instance, you were applying to advanced grant. It depends on the score that you got in your previous application.
I think it was synergy from synergy. This is why I understood.
No, synergy to advance. Yes.
Okay. Yes.
So clearly the answer is yes. you
Yes.
can.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you then. I think that's clear. Then a question related to something we've talked about already, but taking it from a different angle. The provided budget for starting grant isn't enough to fund three PhD students for 4 years, even when there's no material costs. Can I plan to fund one student from my own funding?
Sure. Yeah.
Additional funding is always welcome.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Then a question in terms of particular criteria and measures of excellence. Are there any scientific or performance criteria for applicants? For example, the numbers of publications or citations, previous successful grants, etc. Angela?
Okay, so one thing that the Council really wanted to make clear is, for example, that we do not ask for high impact factors. In fact, it was never asked, but many people thought it was.
Sure.
And I must say, in some panels, it's a metric that was used. Different communities also use different things. So now this is explicitly a no-no. In terms of metrics, again, in the diversity of research field and communities, people have different kind of outputs. So again, it depends. If you're a lawyer, having a monograph, or an historian is quite important mark of achievement. If you're a theoretical physicist, probably not write monographs, or some of them depends. If you're certain people. So it really depends on the field of science, and we do not prescribe. So the evaluators are not asked to tick the box how many citation and how many, and so on and so forth. It's really the appreciation of the scientific panels.
We have 1 minute left as from the time we said, so I'll take one last question. I'll take not the next one, but the following one, because it's a different type of question to one we've asked before. Is it possible to submit clinical trials projects for synergy or consolidator grants?
Well, again, the point is, what is the clinical trial going to do in terms of breakthrough and innovation, and whether it is synergy or consolidator, it depends on whether you need to collaborate with other principal investigators and their team, because the ambition and, if you like, complexity of the work you want to do is something that requires that effort, while if you're going for a consolidator grant, you think that you and your team can do it basically by yourself. Now, a clinical trial by itself probably would not fly, and it's the same as it happens, and this is very explicit in the work program, for example, for projects that want to build data sets, databases. This is more an infrastructure project than breakthrough research. Can be part of it, but
by
only that.
Very clear, very clear. We still have over 90 questions to answer.
Okay.
We're not going to really get chances to
in
do
3
these
minutes.
live. We're not going to get chances to do these live, but we'll ensure that collectively we get answers to all of your questions, and we post those on our website, as I said before. So I'd like to turn to you, the audience, and thank you for tuning into this webinar. We hope you learned something useful. We answered your questions that you have on the work program. Before you go, I'd be grateful if you could answer one last question on Slido to give your feedback on this webinar and help us improve for the future. You can still answer this question on Slido for a week after the end of this webinar. So whilst we encourage you to do it now, you can also do it subsequently if you have to go to another meeting now or have another appointment now. Then just to remind you, for further information on the 2025 work programme, you can access this directly from the ERC website. You can also get full information on latest developments and on news through LinkedIn, through X, through Instagram, and the WhatsApp channel, which will give you timely updates on the ERC funding. And then just a final reminder, please remember about the national contact points in your countries, and the list with their contact details is also on our website. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today. I'd like to thank Angela and Jose for sharing their expertise and their knowledge with us. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Hilda, Kali, Aris, Tomek, and Marcin from my team for putting all of this webinar together and making sure that things went so smoothly. So thank you very much, and good afternoon from Brussels, and goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.